If you get your perspective right in the simple way that can take you under 10 seconds, you've put your brain and mind in, your psychoneurobiology is in a very healthy state that you can do those, whatever of those routines you feel necessary. But we do so much because we're trying to biohack everything, and that in itself can become very toxic.
Is there an optimal morning routine to optimize our mental health throughout the day?
I definitely think there is. So first of all, I say that with a caveat that everyone's going to have their own, what works for them. But there's certain mind things that you need to do every day when you wake up because your mind drives everything else. So if you're going to get the best out of your workout or whatever routine it is that you go into, whatever you eat, etc., you need to get your mind in the right space so that your neurophysiology can actually benefit from whatever else you do. So the first thing, when I wake up in the morning, the very first thing is to do a double check on how I am, my perspective in that moment. So am I waking up complaining? Am I waking up anxious? Am I waking up? So it's a double, sort of like an observation of my mood, my perspective in that moment. Because as you go from sleep to wake, your brain chemicals are doing all kinds of things. And if we don't catch that moment, so if we're in a negative complaining mood, for example, that will set the tone for a lot of the rest of the day. And the rest of the day will become quite difficult. And you can do all kinds of great gratitude things and meditation, but by not catching that first moment as you wake up and checking it, it makes everything else that much less effective and more difficult to do. So first thing, get yourself, literally observe yourself. I call it the multiple perspective advantage, and observe as you wake up. What's my mood like? What am I feeling? How am I looking at the world? My perspective. And then it's very quick. And if you catch yourself, oh gosh, this is the day, we're starting to complain, that is immediately sending the wrong kind of energy waves through the brain, and it's disrupting the balance and the flow and chemicals and all kinds of stuff. So it's to say, okay, well, I'm complaining. Why am I complaining? Why do I feel like this? So you don't judge yourself. You have a lot of compassion. You basically say, okay, I'm showing up complaining. How's this feel in my body? I'm feeling kind of tense. I'm waking up tense. How am I looking at the world? Today sucks. And that's okay. So you literally run through 4 little things: your emotions, your behaviors, your bodily sensation, and your perspective. Very quick. You can do that in like 10 seconds, 5 seconds when you get a hang of it. And then that just, and by acknowledging that, you can then say, okay, why? I slept badly, I didn't quite resolve things last night, or I'm a bit concerned about today. You don't have to solve the problem. It's just an acknowledgement. It's this step-by-step acknowledgement that you are actually not letting your brain, which merges with the environment, drive you. You actually drive your brain.
So wait, there's 4 things that you want to scan, essentially, take an inventory of when you wake up?
Yes,
What are those 4 things again?
So first of all, your perspective, it kind of hits you immediately as you wake up complaining or irritated or today sucks, that kind of thing. That generally is the first thing that you would look at. Am I complaining? Is that my state of, so in other words, your perspective, how you're looking at life in the moment. That generally will stimulate your emotions. So I'm angry, frustrated, upset, scared, whatever. So you kind of swing into that. So it's a quick check. My perspective, my emotion, where do I feel this in my body? Okay, gut ache. And what are my immediate behaviors? Am I like climbing back under the pillow? Am I trying to put a pillow on my head? Am I jumping out of bed? What is my immediate sort of, even if you haven't done the behavior, are you about to leap out of bed with excitement, or are you about to dive back into the pillows, that kind of thing? So it's a very quick observational state, that observational little process that you go through. And that shifts your neurochemistry into the right direction. And then from there, you can, move into a more in-depth process of that. If you want to, like if you go into a meditation, you can then add more things on. But that's a really good initial start.
Wow.
You set up you prime your brain, because your brain's a substrate that your mind uses. So you prime your day, your brain and your body together to be able to do whatever it is that comes next and get the most benefit out of it.
And you still do that while your head's on the pillow?
Pretty much. It's literally open your eyes. It's coming into wakefulness. It's that into wakefulness moment that's really critical.
A lot of people, and myself included, I'm guilty of this. I check my phone when I wake up.
It's like the first thing, your eyes are like this and you're like grabbing your phone.
Yeah, it's terrible. I mean, I do it and I know that it's terrible. I know it's terrible as I'm doing it. I start judging myself for doing it. Conversely, right? Like if that's the most optimal way to start the day, what is like checking your phone first thing in the morning do?
Well, if you check your phone before you've even got your eyes open, which we kind of tend to do, you're going to, the phone is immediately, your brain will merge with everything that you focus on. So if you suddenly have all these, if you jump into straight to social media, or if there's an email that comes up that throws you off, or you look at the news, you're immediately immersing your mind and brain into a chaotic state. And then that chaos affects right down to the level of your DNA. So if you then get out of bed and do a workout, you can lose up to 86% of the benefit of your workout, anything in that region.
Wow.
So that it's just like as your eyes, it's just to train yourself. I've got myself trained now. It's a skill that you develop. You train yourself. As your eyes open, where am I at? And then catch it immediately and then go into the next. And then grab a phone. I do. But I first do this little wake up check thing, and then I'll go and check my phone. Being a mom, I'm always checking voice text from my kids. I'm always, it's that constant watchfulness before, and that's what I'm doing it for. And then
I love it. It's a great perspective because, a lot of these so-called biohackers online in the wellness space that make it seem like you've got to do 1,500 things before you have your morning coffee to optimize your day, right? Most of them
I'm
are
already stressed just thinking of those.
Right. And most of them are single guys with no children, no obligations. And I'm assuming...
Can I say no life? No, I'm just joking. Sorry.
I'm assuming it gets frustrating to hear that perspective over and over and over again, especially for people who do have like life obligations to children, to pets, to jobs, things like that.
Absolutely, because we've become, the biohack focus is good because it's helping us do things differently, but we've got to be careful of using an external thing to control our internal state. And also, if there's a stressful routine and too many things, it's not going to work. And if you get your perspective right in the simple way that can take you under 10 seconds, you've put your brain and mind in, your psychoneurobiology is in a very healthy state that you can do whatever of those routines you feel necessary. But we do so much because we're trying to biohack everything, and that in itself can become very toxic.
I saw somebody on Twitter describe it as holistic derangement syndrome.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, it's just like this phenomenon now due to the proliferation of like wellness influencers and things like that, that even people with like, highly credentialed people, but everybody's clamoring for attention now.
Yes.
So it's like, I've got the secret. No, I've got the secret. No, I've got the secret. The right protocol, the right tools. And so it's led to this like, this kind of dysphoria that somehow it's like just waking up and going about your day and just making sure that your mental, that your mental faculties are in order is like not enough suddenly.
I know, and it's actually, I love the way you describe that, and it's true because we've become so focused on doing so much that we've forgotten about some basic things, and it's confusing and overwhelming, and that in itself is not healthy for the brain and the mind and the body to work properly. So it's really getting back to basics, and as you say, by the time you've done just 10 minutes of this, just 10 minutes of that, 2 hours of your day have gone by, and you're completely overwhelmed. And anyone who always says, Max, when anyone ever says to me, or I read a book or a cover of a book says something like, this is the diet, or this is the hack, or this has to be done in order for you to control your sleep, I immediately will think, I'm sorry, but there's obviously good information there, and everyone has something to contribute, but there's never only one way. And that's why with my work, what I'm trying to say is that it's not that I'm giving you a technique. It's more that I'm working on the system of how can you get your mind, which drives everything. Your mind, without your mind, you're dead. How can you get your mind prepared for all the things you would like to get done? And then that way you can be more selective in which of those hacks, if you want to use them, which of them are the best for you and which work for you today. Maybe one today and 3 tomorrow, or none today and 10 tomorrow.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of these like overly convoluted protocols actually contribute to the mental mess.
Oh gosh. Because if you're not doing them, there's that whole thing in the wellness space. You're not happy? Well, you haven't done this. And you haven't done all these 20 things. And that in itself is going to create mental chaos.
Yeah, so true. So you're here to help us clean up the mental mess. But the focus of your new book is children. Why did you decide to focus on children?
Such a great question.
For your new book.
Well, it's a great question. Well, the book Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess, this other one that we spoke about last time, is focused on more on sort of 14 plus. And I am a mother of 4. They're all adults, and about to be grandmother, by the way. In August, our first grandchild's getting born.
Congrats.
Thank you. So excited about that. But I worked with kids in my practice for years, and that experience combined has created a need for me. I did this with kids all the time, and I saw how effective it was to help a child to learn the skill of developing their innate resilience and managing their mind, and how that carries over into school, relationships, etc. And the sooner we start with this, the better we are managing our mental mess as an adult. And also what prompted this particular book was so many of the adults that I worked with in my practice, and then since I've just do, all the platforms that I'm on and helping people with their mind, we get so much a connection and communication with people saying, hey, I wish someone had just shown me how to deal with my emotions when I was a child. So there's a need to be able to teach a child from young, and it's something that we should do. So that was really a strong motivation. Then the third motivation was just, all we hear all day long is how children's mental health is in a complete crisis. And there's so much fear around what do we do? And it's pushing people, I believe, into the wrong way of managing it. And I'm concerned that we're exacerbating the problem, which the research is actually showing. So I decided it was time to actually release a tool that would empower parents to empower children, to empower themselves, and not rely on a system that's actually broken to help them manage their minds.
Now, what age range are you actually focusing on in this book?
2 to 10.
2 to 10?
Yeah. So
Wow.
You can teach a child as young as 2 and 3 how to actually start learning the skills of managing their mind.
This is
really
particularly relevant to me. Not as you mentioned, I don't have a child, but I just became an uncle.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. My little brother just had a little baby girl. She's like 8 months old.
So cute.
Kayla. And so I'm sort of as the health expert in the family, as the wellness sort of oracle that my family members look up to in these matters. I think this is a really wonderful opportunity for me to pick your brain about going forward, how to set up this human being to succeed.
Oh, I love that. I love that you're taking that role, so you could be the wise mind oracle as well as the food oracle.
Yeah, there you go. You go. So I've got
Uncle Oracle.
Uncle Oracle, yeah. So
There
she's still a year or so away from being 2, but walk me through the process. Is there a secret formula, or is it, what are the steps?
Well, what is key in this, there are steps. There's 5 basic steps you can walk a child through. And those are the same steps that you would walk an adult through, same basic 5 steps, plus a sort of preparation phase. So when I say steps and preparation, what are we actually doing? We are using our mind to do something. So our mind is our aliveness, our ability to think, to feel, to choose, etc. So what we're wanting to do is that your little niece is learning to be understanding, the relationships and communication, and they understand a lot more than what we realize. So what we call their receptive understanding is way higher than what they can express. But we often assume because they're expressing on such a low level that they don't understand, but they do. So first thing to bear in mind is they're a lot smarter than what we realize.
Interesting.
Okay, and you mustn't underestimate their ability to understand the power of emotions and, impact of that, that it's mom's not there, I'm sad, or uncle's leaving and I'm sad. They do experience that. And then the second thing is that mind is their aliveness. So therefore, mind, how they're managing their mind from young is shaping the brain. And the mind needs the brain as a substrate. It uses the brain as a substrate for you to be as sharp as a human. So from young, if we can help them to decide what they put in their brain, which sounds crazy, but that's what we're doing all day long. We're putting things in our brain and wires into our brain and influences how we function. That is great. So what can you do as an uncle? It's some of the first things is reading them stories, and the connection of holding your niece and that whole connection and letting, even though they can't read the words, reading that story, it stimulates that whole narrative that's going on, that whole connection and communication of the body language, the eye contact, the communication, the connection is massive for them to develop a healthy perspective of who they are as a person. And then reading the story, it stimulates a creativity. Now, they can't see the words, but you're showing them pictures and you're showing them some words. They know that there's some connection being made, and you put them into a creative state. So their brain is very stimulated, starts growing a lot of networks.
Wow.
You're also teaching life context. You're teaching life stories. Better than any kind of scientific experiment can test something. A fictional story or a little story is teaching them so much about life. So stories are absolutely essential. You cannot read enough to your child. My kids from newborns, I would literally carry them to the library be holding them, choose books, and the librarians would say, what, that child doesn't. I said, absolutely. My newborns, I'm showing them pictures, I'm reading to them, I'm building that connection and communication. So I've done years of work around that area. So that's really, and that's easy. That's a technique that all of us can do. And I cannot emphasize it enough, because so many schools, Max, today, especially if you go into public and charter schools, don't have libraries. And, they're not reading to children. And I've shown with my research, not just mine, when you read to a child, first thing in the morning, last thing at night, starting school days, you are developing a very healthy mind.
Wow.
So that's an easy thing to do.
So read to them even before they can speak.
Yeah, read.
Really?
Read.
Wow.
And then, it's maybe picture books that are very, and that they can feel and touch, but you make up a story.
Wow.
That creativity that you draw on, that's energy that you're generating. They're connecting with you and they learning from you how you're seeing the world. So they're building up perspective. So you talk about this nice soft little duck that's doing this, and you make up some little weird story, or a cat, and you think of your cat in a story about that. Is your creativity is pouring into their brain, and they're forming context in their life, and they're forming the decisions, like that cat does this, and then the cat gets sad. And I'm thinking of you with your cat, and maybe you've got a little picture of a cat, or you've got a toy, or those books that are soft and you can feel them.
Yeah.
That is very, very good for the child. So even at that young age, you're also teaching them how to solve problems, because book stories are presenting a problem and solving it. The cat wants to get the food, and the food is there, and how's it going to, they're so simple, but that's what the child is learning to do. So you're actually teaching a very big mind principle, a big mind management principle through reading a story. And the mind management principle that which is the 5-step process I've developed called the neurocycle, is wound into that storytelling exchange. And what that does is that as you start the story with the cat, let's say, and they're feeling it, and you're showing them the picture, and maybe you say, remember Uncle's cat, and there's all that exchange. You are stimulating them to gather awareness of environment, of context, of an emotion, of how they feel that when they feel that little that furry cat inside the book. Those feely books that I'm talking about.
Yeah, they're tactile.
Tactile, and they see your eyes light up, so they read that. Oh, this is happiness. This is nice. This feels good. I feel happy. I'm getting a hug. Because your body language will change as you talk about, the book and the cat and you whatever. And so they are gathering awareness of their emotions, how their body feels, the perspective, how you're looking at things. This is fun. This is exciting. And then you are stimulating a sort of behavioral exchange of, we're doing things together. We are looking at this situation and we're going to solve a problem. They're not thinking those words, but that's what you're creating. So you've gathered awareness of emotions, of bodily sensations, of behaviors, and of perspective. And that's very sciencey sounding stuff, but you've done that through a story. And then you start telling the story. So now there's a reflection going on, which is the second step. The cat needs to get the food, but it can't reach the food, or the cat wants the food and the food falls down and it's all over the floor, whatever. There's something very simple there, but you're now reflecting. So why is the cat sad, or why is this cat scared? Because there was a big noise. So you're reflecting on the emotions that were felt, or the emotions, the cat's emotions, the cat's reaction, whatever, and then you start saying, okay, well, how are we going to solve the problem, which is the third step, where you're starting to say, this is all the parts of the problem. The cat needs to get the food's on the floor, whatever. And that's a third step that you are moving into, where you're actually working out an issue. You're saying, okay, these are if we put the food down low, or that was the wrong jar. I mean, I'm really going off on a tangent here, but you are going from gathering to reflecting to actually solving a problem. And you say, okay, now what? Then the fourth step is recheck. What are we going to solve? What is our solution? This has happened. How can we help the cat get the food more easily next time, or not get the food because they ate too much or something? And they got too full and they were grumpy or something. Cat getting too much catnip, they go crazy or something like that. Those are things kids can relate to. And then the action would be, okay, we're going to put the food up higher. I mean, it's so simple.
But you're saying it's like stories, like problem solving is built into storytelling.
Yes,
and storytelling, we have an innate need.
Exactly.
To be told stories.
Exactly. And it develops your problem solving capacity. So now that child, fast forward to pre-kindergarten, and that child's 2 and maybe going to daycare, and that daycare, and they a child of 2 months understands empathy. So now they're sitting in the playground or they're playing with their toys, and one of the other kids is maybe a bit rambunctious and comes along and knocks over their little tower that they've just built, and that makes them sad, and they maybe pick up a block and throw it at them, and a little altercation begins, and they maybe get shouted at by the teacher because maybe the other kids are doing the same thing. So a context happens, and they come home and they're just very quiet when you pick them up, or they're very sad, or they throw a tantrum. So now instead of thinking, what's wrong with my child? And maybe this happens not once but twice. So there's a consistent, even at that young age, there's a consistent potential bullying that's starting to happen. But now that child can't tell you that, but it'll come out in the child's behaviors. And in our current environment, if that is difficult enough for the child, that'll come out in a series of behaviors where they may be throwing more tantrums, or they are not, the sleeping gets affected, or they start showing things that if you look at the influences on social media, you could think your child has some kind of mental illness potentially developing, and off you pop to the doctor to say, hey, my child's not sleeping and they're just not the same. And before you know it, you could get a diagnosis of pediatric bipolar when your child does not have, shouldn't even be labeled like that, because labels, you can't label mind stuff. You can only describe mind stuff because of the uniqueness. But before you know it, you've got sucked into a system that is now, the way it affects the way you look at your child. And sure, I'm going down an extreme path, but if you can teach a child this storytelling 5-step neurocycle process in this very indirect way, when that child is experiencing that, they know from the interaction of the story and the analyzing of the story and the sequence that you know in your mind as a parent, which the book teaches you to go through, you have innately wired that into the child. So they know if there's a problem from the stories, they're not consciously thinking of this. It's in the non-conscious, which is the biggest part of the mind, the most intelligent part of us. It's our driving force. But from those interactions, you've created a pathway, a connection where the child knows, okay, I'm feeling sad, I don't know how to express it, throwing a tantrum, whatever, but they can actually maybe grab a storybook. They can grab a point of contact. And that story, if they're going to the story and holding up a book, they're telling you something, because that's what we used to solve problems before, so let's solve it before. So what I've done is, in this book, I've created a character called Brainy, and here's the little toy we've created.
That's Brainy?
This is Brainy. And this toy is in the book in, I think, 100, and you can flip through the book, you'll see there's multiple versions of cute. Brainy. And so you create a contact point for a child to even, point to the picture, I feel like that. Or, if they pick up Brainy, this is, if I'm feeling sad, I pick up Brainy. If you want to tell me something, you pick up Brainy. And eventually we'll have all Brainy in different happy, sad, different toys of this nature.
They use it like as a proxy.
As a proxy. Because little children, if you give them a toy and they don't know how to express it, and you can maybe give them a couple of toys, they'll be sitting and this Brainy will be playing, and then another Brainy or another toy comes and bashes them over. And so they'll enact, they can dramatize, they can express it. But you've got a point of contact, and you know that if you make a child aware, you read them the stories, but you also make them aware, here's Brainy, here's that book, and they form that association, you have a point of contact. Now that's the very young child. The older child learns that quicker and very quickly will move over to, I feel sad, and can you help me? This is my cry for help. Can you help me? Can I connect with you?
Now, at a certain point, does that integrate into self-awareness?
Totally. You're teaching that. You're teaching the mere fact that a child can actually go grab the storybook if there isn't a Brainy, or grab the Brainy, or go point to that book, or whatever. Maybe you could have some toy that you have that you, if the child's feeling sad, this is what you bring to me. You teach a child that's awareness. So you're developing self-awareness, you're co-regulating, and eventually that leads to a level of self-regulation. So we start this much earlier than what you start this like from very, very young. So as opposed to only teaching a child to self-regulate much older, which often isn't even really taught. So a child goes into adolescence and they still don't know how to self-regulate. That's when, things like all the challenges of adolescence can then spill over into misuse of drugs and all that kind of thing, because they don't know how to really talk about their stuff.
Right.
So what you want to teach kids from young is it's okay to be a mess. It doesn't matter if you are throwing a tantrum. Yes, we can't throw a tantrum in the shop because it's difficult, whatever, but I recognize that I validate that you're feeling something, and let's not throw toys off. It's not right to do that, but let's get home, we'll talk about it. We're going to resolve this together. We're going to work out. So you validate the experience. You show them that you can't throw things off the shelf in the toy shop or out the cart if you're in the grocery store. We don't do those things, but I do recognize something's going on. It's okay. I understand. We're going to talk about Brainy, or we're going to, whatever your point of contact is. So you're teaching a child that I can be sad, and that's not who I am. I'm not bad. I'm just going through something and I don't know how to process it. So I need my mommy or daddy to help me process it. So that's one of the hardest things for a parent to deal with, because if you've got kids and they're throwing a tantrum in the shop, or you're very busy and like all of us are, and you're trying to look after multiple children or run job, but it's just life, even if it's one child, it's tough. It's to have that ability to validate and recognize that your child, the way they're showing up, is not that they're naughty or bad or mentally ill, which is so quickly how it goes down that route, which is frightening, but to recognize that they actually are experiencing something that they're showing up because of, and to give them that ability to have a way of expressing it. And that's what this book is all about. How do you explain this to children of different levels, and what is the for all the like the age development? It's very easy to read. It's all very, this is the explanation to the parent, and then this is what you tell the child, a sort of model that you can then adapt to your child on how to do each of these different steps in the neurocycle, even the timing and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, so valuable, so incredibly valuable. Is there a way to prevent childhood trauma? Because I feel like one of the things that, an idea that I've been sort of meditating on, ruminating on, just by way of the many different conversations that I've had on this show, is that it's really difficult, if not impossible. It may be impossible to escape childhood social injury free. There's always going to be something. There's obviously different grades of trauma. Some are way more severe than others, but that ultimately everybody that nobody escapes childhood trauma free.
Totally correct. And as you say quite correctly, there's a scale, there's a grading. So your 1, 2, 3s would be your day-to-day struggles that, sibling took a toy or something, down to the hardcore, abuse and that kind of thing in your 8, 9, 10. And hopefully the majority of people don't live in the 8, 9, 10 zone, but all of us live in that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, sort of 6. So 1, 2, 3 being your day-to-day struggles, and 4, 5, 6 being maybe something that's growing, a consistent bit of a pattern that's starting to develop. That is not a total huge mess of trauma, but it still is traumatic for the child and needs to be recognized as such. So it's impossible to avoid. And I'm going to say something, Max, we shouldn't try to avoid it. Let's talk about the immune system. You know a lot about the immune system. And we know that with the immune system, if there's a pathogen in our body, our immune system is going to send out immune factors to read the danger and help the body to fight that. So we need to develop a child's psychological immune system as well. So our immune system of the brain is trained to recognize a pathogen. It's also trained to recognize a toxic experience. So we've got these trees over here. And this, every experience, that child bullying a child at school, pushing them over, that 2-year-old, the example I gave at the beginning, down up to a severe sexual abuse or something, each of those is an experience that is processed by a child's mind and is built into the brain, because the mind uses the brain as a protein structure. So this is a protein structure with multiple, made of millions of billions, trillions of proteins. These would be the dendrites, and these would be all of this is sort of the neuron. So it's the structure of the neuron. So
it's oddly beautiful.
It's oddly beautiful. So the root system of the tree is the actual origin of the experience. So the experience, the bullying, the abuse, the detail, the memories of then this is the processing into how that child perceives themselves. So this is all the self-talk, the self-view, etc. How they're viewing themselves, how they see the situation with their limited understanding. And then how this combination is how you show up in life. So this thought tree contains lots of memories, source, root memories, and then how it's processed. And that then leads to a child showing up in life, or an adult, humans, with all those 4 signals I spoke about in the beginning, which is how we feel, our behaviors, our bodily sensations, and our perspectives, how we show up. Throwing the tantrum, fighting at school, being difficult, withdrawing, bedwetting, whatever. So different ways that we can show up, and mood swings, and even hallucinations and delusions, and all depending on how extreme the trauma is and how complex the trauma is. So that's going to happen. As I said, the scale is different for it's unique for each person. We can't avoid that, because life is, we can't control the events and circumstances of life. We'd love to bubble wrap our kids, but we can't. They're going to experience stuff that we cannot control everything. So and hopefully it's not going to be the 8, 9s and 10s, but there's a chance it will happen. And the other side of the coin is the day-to-day struggles are needed. Those are normal parts of developing our psychological immune system. So in the same way that our your brain recognizes a pathogen and sends out an immune response. Our brain also recognizes this toxic experience in this protein format. It's as real physically in the brain as a pathogen, just a different protein structure. So our psychology is as real as the biology. That's what we need to understand. So what our immune system gets trained, it learns. Like, for example, if you have the measles virus, your brain is, your immune system of your brain and body recognize that, build the soldiers, and if it ever comes again, it fights them. That's what vaccines and things are, the principle of the immune system and so on. So if we don't have that, if a child's never exposed to anything, like if we never let them touch a dirt and stick it in their throat and whatever, they don't build that immune system in their body.
Right.
Same thing with this. If you protect your child and coddle your child and don't let them have any experience and try and preempt and helicopter parent and bubble wrap a child, you don't build their psychological immune system. And so when the things do happen where you're not around, they have very little resilience and ability to be able to deal with that. So it's extremely important that we don't try to remove all of that. And we are kind of in an environment currently right the way through to the university, the college campuses, where if something doesn't make you feel comfortable, we don't want to talk about that.
Yeah.
And that's not good. We've got to be able to debate ideas. That's the whole point of university. That's one end of, growing up and being a child growing into an adult. And the other side of the coin is that there is going to be someone inevitably that will bully you at some point, or steal your lunch, or break your toy, or upset your siblings are going to upset you. You're different. You've got differences of opinion. You grow.
It happens in adulthood all the
happens
time.
All the time.
Yeah.
It's an inevitable part of life.
Right.
So if you don't develop that as a child, you're not going to have coping skills as an adult. So if we teach our children young that, that is horrible, but this is what we can do. How did you feel? Let's reflect on that. Let's get all the things up into the conscious mind. There's ways. I'd give you in the book how you can handle those things. That let's bring it up so that we can see it, and we can draw pictures and we can act it out. So you get it out. When something comes out, it becomes weakened. This becomes weakened, and then we can change it. So you're not giving the kids all the science, although by 4, 5, 6, they love the science. They will relate to, the trees become weak. We're pulling the trees from, when I talk about it, I'm pulling the tree up, and I can fix my brain, and I can go in my brain, and I can pull those off, and I can clean up the weeds, and kids totally relate to that. So you can give them those analogies, and that's what you're teaching them, to understand that anything that happens to me is going to impact me because it goes in my brain. It's going to impact my life. And if I don't manage it, then it's going to be worse. But if I manage it, I'm still going to be sad because I can't change that it's happened. But I can find a way to find peace and a way of dealing and working through it. And that's our role as adults in the children's lives, is to help them work out how to do that. So as they get older and older and they're more and more independent, they have a system that gets the mind, making the brain work like it should, so that you can have wisdom operating. So you won't have all the solutions, but you'll be a lot wiser than going in blind.
Wiser and more resilient.
That's the thing. You're releasing the innate resilience. We are very resilient. We bounce back. And that's the interesting thing. But we are told in today's society that basically resilience is, we're fragile. We're not fragile. We're very strong. We've got to unmask the resilience and not suppress the resilience.
And also embrace social hormesis.
Yes.
As you were talking, it made me think about the value of we've had many conversations about hormesis on this podcast. Essentially, those like the low dose stress that actually makes you stronger, more resilient. Whether it's symbiotic phytoadaptation, which occurs when we eat these plant so-called defense compounds, right, that make us more resilient from the inside out, or even when we engage in exercise or a sauna session or a cold plunge. Like it's a stress on the body, but it makes you, on the other side of that stress, you come out stronger. You come out more resilient. And there's a spillover effect where you don't adapt to the cold. You don't acclimate to the cold or the heat or the exercise exclusively. That actually has a spillover effect where it makes you stronger psychologically in other areas of your life. And so, you can't deprive your children of these sources of social hormesis.
So I love that explanation. That's exactly correct. We build and grow through our human experience, which is the suffering. If you just let a child only have good experiences, when they do have the first sad experience, they will crash. And so it's good from young. It's part of being life. It's part of the whole misery, sadness, these depression, anxiety. None of these are bad. They're all, if they're managed. So there's that balance, that that good stress, keeping the stress working for you, that Goldilocks principle. We talk about the Goldilocks principle in when we talk about the energy frequencies in the brain. And the Goldilocks principle is the porridge is too hot or it's too cold or whatever, it's just right. All of us have our own Goldilocks principle. And when you're in that operational principle, you are experiencing the ups and downs of life. You are recognizing and saying, it's okay to cry. It's okay to be depressed. There's a reason I need to go work through this, not suppress, avoid, hide, get away from it. So if we constantly tell a child or an adult that if you feel sad or if you feel depressed, there's something wrong with your brain. It's not, we're telling a child there's something wrong with you. There's a chemical imbalance. You've got a broken brain. There's something wrong with you as an individual. Now that child's been bullied at school. Now they get told by a bunch of people in white coats, scary adults that tell them, hey, you're broken and your mother's crying because you're getting this diagnosis and you're feeling your mother's tension, because a child will do a child's anxiety level, stress level is very much based on the parent's anxiety and stress level. And I don't say this to make a parent feel guilty. I say it with all understanding of being a parent myself of 4 children and working in this field for years, is that if we have to be honest about our own anxiety, because children, the mental health of your child, the anxiety stress levels is based on how you're managing yours. So it's better for you to say, hey, I feel really bad today. I'm feeling really depressed. This is what's happened. I'm feeling so tired because of this and this, but this is why, and this is what I'm going to do about it. And that's what the 5 steps do, is you as a parent honestly and authentically tell your child that and demonstrate that. And that gives you the Goldilocks principle, I can never say that word, hormesis, where you are finding, you're teaching them that it's okay to have a bit of stress, get that cold shower, have that plunge, have that sauna, have that bit of stress. This is normal, but what are we going to do about it? How are we going to make it work for us? And that's basically the same principle.
And also be willing to model for your children vulnerability. So that they feel like that they have a safe space to then express how they feel.
Exactly. Because if you are sad or angry or frustrated as a parent and you're overwhelmed, and parenting is extremely overwhelming, and there's a tremendous amount of guilt that goes into being a parent, and you just can't be a perfect parent. And the striving to be a perfect parent is a problem. And if you are striving and being controlled by your social media influences and things because you've got to do this, but you are going to bring that into the home, and you're going to be trying so hard not to do those things that it's going to come out in snappiness, in yelling at your kids when you don't want to yell at them, in you hiding stuff, and the child thinking something's wrong with mommy. It must be me. Because the first thing that a child will think, even an adult child, is if you're being weird or you're not yourself, they think, what have I done? Even an adult child, but a young child more. So a child immediately looks at that parent, caregiver, as someone that they may have hurt, and then they take it on themselves. Meanwhile, if you told the child, I'm having a bad day, I'm sorry I kicked your toys, I'm sorry I yelled at you when I walked in the front door, I'm sorry that I just seem miserable at the moment, I am miserable, can I sit down on the couch and tell you a little why? And then obviously age appropriately. And then you run through the neurocycle. You don't have to say the words neurocycle. You don't have to, whatever you want. But you can say, this is how I'm feeling, this is how I feel in my body, this is why, reflect, this is, let me draw some pictures for you about how I feel. This is what's happened. This is what I'm going to do about it. Now I'm going to do it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to sit and watch a funny movie with you. And we're going to take the dogs for a walk. And that models for the child. They know, oh, okay, so I've had a bad day. I can sit down on the couch. I can go through these little steps. That's what you're doing here. And then you use this throughout your life. Does that make sense? It's sort of you modeling for them. They're seeing you giving them permission. You're validating their experience. Because I think as parents, sometimes we have this unrealistic thing that I've got to be perfect. I've got to have all my ducks in a row. I've got to have my shit together, if I may say it like that, as a parent. Because if I don't, I'm impacting my children in a negative way. No. You pretending to have it together is impacting your child in a negative way. You giving yourself permission to be a mess, and then managing the mess gives your child the permission. And then they'll learn to manage. And that creates a very healthy dynamic.
I love that because it's real. How do you know what to share and what not to share so as not to cause boundary rupture, which is a topic that we've discussed a little bit, on the show in the past. I think it's one thing to model and to share and to be real, but then also you don't want to make your child your surrogate partner and start sharing things that you should.
Or your therapist. Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely. And that the danger for there comes in as they get older. as they've become very wise. And if you bring a child up to think deeply, they become very wise and very verbal very quickly. And I can speak for my own kids. I mean, they're incredibly insightful and deep because they've grown up with this stuff. So they're very wise, and I can get really good advice from them. So yes, that's an excellent question. What is the boundary? How much can they handle? And that's something you're going to have to judge individually. Obviously, a little child, you're going to not go and say the detail of what the worker colleague said to you. You're going to say, I had a bad day at work, someone was nasty to me, and they made me very sad. That's enough for a 2, 3-year-old. 4-year-old, 5-year-old, maybe a 6-year-old might say, well, what did they do? Then you can say, well, they said nasty things to me that made me feel bad about myself. By the time you're getting, that's kind of an 8, 9, 10-year-old, because this book goes up to 10. By the time you get to 8, 9, 10, you can say, well, they actually said to me that I was really stupid at my job. And that really hurt me because I don't feel I am stupid at my job. So it's giving a little bit more detail. But what maybe really happened was that they've been on at you and made you feel like maybe there's been a bit of sexual abuse, or there's been things that have said that shouldn't have been said, or inappropriate touch. And you could also use that, say that, well, I felt this is what happened and this is how I dealt with it. And so that a child also learns what is appropriate touch and what's inappropriate touch. You can use those lessons from your life as lessons for them. When it comes into adolescence and they're starting to be very, verbal and more insightful, that's where you have to be very careful. So I think it's more difficult the older they get than it is, especially in that 12 to 18 year age bracket, which is the most difficult time of the entire human life cycle. But they show so much wisdom, and that's where we've got to be careful of our boundaries, that we say just enough and not enough, and what you can judge by the child's response and behavior. So because children will absorb our emotions, and sometimes they absorb more than they should. So if you're having major marital issues, it's not fair to put the details and kind of force them to take sides, for example. And yes, we know that logically, but when you're in the situation, it's very easy to slip into, saying your dad said this, your mom said this, whatever, to make them look, even if it's nuanced, they pick it up. Yeah. And that's terrible to put a child, to force a child to take sides. If the one parent is very obviously abusive, it makes sense to protect your child from that abusive parent and so on. Those extreme cases. But it's if you're having sort of irritating issues with your husband, or wife, it's very important to, yes, I'm irritated, dad said this, dad said that, or we had a fight and they saw you have the fight. I mean, this has happened. I'm real. I've got a husband, I fight. I've had arguments in front of our kids, and there's the pressure of life and everything. It's just important to unpack that for the children and say, look, I didn't mean what I said. This is why I said it. We've resolved it. This is how we've resolved it. So never let them go to bed without understanding the resolution. We always try to do that. We didn't always succeed. Sometimes things would persist longer. But Mac and myself, my husband, we made a decision to never go to bed without resolving an issue. And so to get a level of resolution and to always try and convey that to the children. We weren't always successful, but that was our attempt. So that's kind of, you're going to have to judge each situation uniquely, but understanding a child of 15, 16, 17, 18, even older, a young adult, they can sit and listen to you, and you may be going through something, and be careful how much you share. Enough that you feel, if you feel they're your therapist, you're telling them too much. If you feel they're your best friend, you're telling them too much. If you just want to help them understand where you're at, and that, it's not them, it's what you're going through, and this is what you're trying to deal with it, and thanks for listening kind of thing, then you're kind of at the right level. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes total sense. Yeah, my mom shared a lot of things about her marriage with me that she shouldn't have.
You felt burdened maybe?
Yeah, she made me, at times when I was a teenager, her surrogate partner sharing things, or surrogate therapist sharing things about her, her marriage that were completely inappropriate. And I never had the chance to reconcile that with my mom. I don't even know if I would have reconciled that with my mom, to be honest, because it's only in over the past couple years, handful of years, that I've even become aware of, that so-called boundary rupture, burden. Yeah. And how it's played out in my adult life. But that's why I'm super curious about this topic.
Now, you've raised an incredible point there, because what you said there was very, very key. You said that you didn't even you don't think you would have addressed this with her because you only became aware of it recently. So your natural love and protective instinct to help, and our natural inside of us as humans, we want to help others, and especially if you love someone, you see them hurting.
Yeah.
That's you absorbed it, and you took stuff into that you shouldn't have taken into, that wasn't your burden to carry. And that's where, if we can have a system in place, what we've had is certain situations where children have been able to turn around, because that are in using the neurocycle system, where a child will turn around to a parent and say that you need a therapist. Like because they understand that they've recognized this is more than I can handle. Or you need to go do a neurocycle or something, which is an indication for a child that, okay, this is too much for me to handle. So we need to give our children the tools. And this is what I'm also trying to do with my work in this book as well, is to help a child. Like, you didn't have that tool, but if you'd had that tool, maybe it would have enabled you to say, hey, Mom, I love you so much, but can you talk to Auntie whatever about this? Or can we find someone else to help, because I don't know how to help you. You didn't have the words for that. And you also saw her pain. So you wanted to absorb and do whatever you could. You as an adult are entitled to do two things. Honor your mother's story. She obviously went through a lot of trauma, but you also have the right to honor the impact it had on your life. And by honoring the impact and dealing with that, you're not dishonoring her memory. You just kind of separate the two. And this is very important, that we allow ourselves to work on the impact of what our parents have brought to the table, because your mother had her the marriage and it was someone else's daughter, and that her parent brought stuff into it. Just never stops. So each of us are going into the parenting role with our baggage. And then there's the traumas of divorce or bad marriage or something like that then comes into play. And we just have to be so careful that we do share with our kids, because they should see, listen, I've had a bad marriage. This is what's going on. These are the situations. But to understand that, there's a level where you don't want to overshare. And that's where the impact of oversharing, you have every right to deal with that impact.
Yeah. My mom's actually sent me to a therapist when I was a child, because I was a bit reclusive. I was, back when the internet came about, I would lock myself in my room for hours at a time. My mom had no idea what was going on. And I was, probably getting into trouble online. I was teaching myself a lot, but regardless, I definitely displayed antisocial tendencies in probably early in high school, middle school. And so she sent me to a therapist, but I didn't have the vocabulary at the time to tell that therapist anything of any import. Exactly. I certainly, if the therapist would have described my relationship with my mom, I would have said, I love my mom. My mom's amazing, because I did. They were both great parents, from what I was able to identify and articulate at the time.
So, well, that first of all, that's good that your mom gave you that opportunity. But look at what you said. That's so key there. You didn't know how to verbalize that. And that's so key. I think that's probably one of the main reasons I've written this book, is to give children a way of verbalizing what they're going through. So that if it's to the parent, if it's to the therapist, and then they can get the perspective. But to be able to know that you can safely unpack something in your mind that you don't fully understand, but that you have the language or the sort of steps for how I can communicate this with an adult. That's really important, to be able to give that to a child. Because as you say, if you were so busy protecting your mom, that we have to almost tell our children, we have to tell our children, listen, I know you love me, and I know you care for me, but I care for you. And we have to say to our kids, listen, stop me if I'm saying too much, and we should stop ourselves too. But we need to give ourselves, I think what I'm trying to say is create the safe enough space that your child can say, hey, I don't want to hear that, or I don't understand that, or I can see it's making you sad, but I don't know what to say to make you feel happy.
Yeah.
Those are the kinds of phrases we need to give a child the ability to actually verbalize, that they can, the tools to be able to tell their story. Because what they're experiencing, what you experienced when your mom told you, that was becoming your story. Your story was your parents were having a bad marriage and your mother was telling you all the details of this bad marriage. You needed the tools to be able to say, I don't get this. I don't understand this. This is too much for me to process. And this is how I can speak about that.
Yeah. I wish I could go back in time and say, stop telling me this stuff. Stop showing me this stuff,
That's where I'm so glad you brought this up, because as parents, we do sometimes overstep the mark. And I know I've done it at times where I've said things that I shouldn't have said. And, and that's why we're never going to be perfect in that process. But if we can then go to our children and say, I shouldn't have shared that with you, or I shouldn't have said that with you, I shouldn't have made you feel, or I should have checked on you to see if you were okay after what I shared.
But it can be so
those
confusing,
kind of
right?
things.
Because it's like at the time as a child, you feel like you're the recipient to really privileged information. You feel like this is like, wow, what an incredible bond I have with the most important person in my life. She's divulging such insane detail to me. Like, so I feel like
there's conflict because you feel that honor of that bond.
Yeah.
But if we can teach a child, like if you knew how to say, because you obviously felt levels of discomfort that you didn't know how to deal with, so you went into coping mechanisms of becoming quite withdrawn and antisocial and getting onto social media and things like into internet as a coping mechanism to try and get away from what you couldn't deal with, because you're absorbing stuff into you that you couldn't discern. It was becoming yours and it wasn't yours.
Right.
And that's that to be able to actually know how to recognize that. And that starts with that story of the cat. I mean, that ridiculous little analogy I gave. It starts with, okay, everything that I'm hearing, I can actually go through a process of seeing how this affects me and questioning and finding if there's an alternative way. And that's a lot of heavy stuff, but you're teaching it in a very simple way to a child. But if that's the child's model, if that's what they've learned to do, when something is overwhelming for them, they'll recognize the symptoms in their what I call the 4 signals, the emotions and body sensations, perspectives and behaviors. And they'll be able to recognize, okay, I need to put up a boundary now. I need to actually give my parent a boundary. So that takes development. The younger we start, the better. But it's never too late.
It's never too late.
It's never too late to learn the skill.
You've mentioned the neurocycle a few times, and I know we've covered it on your prior appearance on the show. But What is that in brief for people?
Perfect. It's a mind-directed neuroplasticity technique. So the mind puts every experience into the brain. And the way it puts it in the brain impacts how we function. So you talking to your mom was an experience. Your mom telling you things, you were putting that into your brain, and you would actually have built a toxic thought. So you would have wired that in. So the neurocycle then is a way of you kind of reverse engineering the impact. So it's looking at the impact and actually seeing, oh, okay, it's making me very emotional. It's making me feel very uncomfortable. I'm pulling away and just going into my room and going into social media and so on. It's those looking at those 4 and then tracking back, okay, that's attached to something, a thought, and deconstructing right down to the root and then reconceptualizing it. So it's 5 steps to help you gather awareness of those signals, reflect on them, and then somehow write that down if you're old enough, or draw pictures or whatever. It's very sequentially, because as you do it sequentially through these steps, the 4th step being the recheck step, where you look at what you've actually written or drawn or whatever, and you say, okay, this is what's happened. What am I going to do? And then the 5th step is an action. It's this very sequential going. You don't skip a step. If you do, you don't get the same benefit. So it's kind of like taking the information that is, look at it this way. It's reading how you are functioning. And it's reverse engineering by recognizing the way I'm functioning is attached to this experience, which is something real in my brain. And I have to pull it up and weaken it so that I can fix the roots to make it comfortable. So an example, I'll use yours if that's okay.
Yeah.
So the fact that you, let's take the adolescent who didn't have the language yet, or that didn't know how to deal with the contradiction that was occurring inside of you, and this love for your mother and the bond and the overwhelming information you had to deal with. So that you didn't quite know how to verbalize, but you sensed that. So non-consciously, your non-conscious mind, which is your 99% of who you are, was recognizing that. So that was showing up that you had this overwhelming, this is too much, but I feel guilty. So I don't understand how to deal with this. So I'm just going to jump straight to a coping mechanism. So you kind of just become aware and you skip all the steps in between of the neurocycle and you go to an action, which is the last step. But that action is a coping mechanism that you've done without doing any processing. And yours was go into a room and go onto social media and become socially withdrawn. Going to a therapist, and I tell therapist says, talk to me. I'm not going to talk to you. I mean, why should I? It's sort of like, where, what? I don't even know how to deal with what I'm processing, kind of thing. So what we want to do, the neurocycle, is to be able to help a child, empower a child to say, okay, this is okay. I'm feeling these. I'm not sure why. There's something going on here. It makes me feel uncomfortable. That's all you get. draw some pictures, play with your toys, write it down. I feel uncomfortable. What am I going to do? I'm actually going to go talk to my uncle or my teacher or another adult or a friend, or sometimes it would be, if you're a teenager, there might be a friend. Peer support is unreal. That's one of the good things of social media is to be able to share with a peer. The minute you share with someone else, even as an adolescent, even as a child, we're very good at giving advice. We're not as good at giving ourselves advice. So by sharing with a peer and saying, hey, my mom's sort of telling me things I'm not comfortable with, you're so involved that you can't see the thing. But your friend might say, yeah, your mom shouldn't be telling you those things. But you needed to hear that peer or whoever, someone your own age telling you that, oh, okay, well, maybe they should action. Mom, I'm uncomfortable with this. I know you need help and I love you. I think that to help you, we need to find someone that you can tell these details to. And you tell me some of the stuff, but I don't know how to deal with all the other stuff you're telling me. So the neurocycle is that process of recognizing how you're showing up, your coping mechanisms, and then going back to going through all the steps, not just being aware, reflecting on what you're aware of. Right, capturing. As you capture and write down, you bring order out of chaos. Really important that you don't just become aware. A lot of our mindfulness CBT, those kinds of things make you very aware. Now what? A lot of the programs at school make children aware. Label your emotions, gather awareness of your emotions. That's a very logical step. But once you're aware, if you just let the plane take off, gather awareness, first step, plane's taking off. You start labeling your emotions. If you don't do something with that, the plane will crash. You have to know how to fly the plane and land the plane. So the neurocycle is taking off, the first step. The second and third step of reflecting very specifically, and then writing down what you've gathered and reflected on is flying with the plane. The recheck is still flying the plane, but getting ready for landing. So this is what's happened. What can I do about it? And then active reach is the action to land the plane, so that you've got some kind of way of moving forward in that moment. And then you would pick it up again. And one neurocycle doesn't do it. You've got to do it repeatedly. So for a behavior or a pattern, like this was a pattern of your mom telling you stuff, for a pattern like that, for you to be able to change how you respond and have the language to have talked to your mom, wouldn't have happened with one neurocycle. You would have had to have done that daily over about 63 days, because it takes that long to rewire the networks. So that toxic tree would then become something much smaller and shrink, and you would have a big healthy one, and this would only become part of it. And that is, okay, I know my mom needs help. I'm allowed to talk about the impact of this on my life. This is her issue, but my action is now that I have to get her to share some of these deeper, dark details with someone else, not me, and only share the basics with me. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Or do you want me to give another example?
No, I think that makes sense. So it's basically like it's a way to run through and process these various. Is it emotions or stimuli? Like
it's experiences. So think of the discussions with your mom as experiences, and it was all around your mom's relationship. So there's this thought in your brain, and the thought's made of lots of memories.
Yeah.
And each conversation that she had with you was adding more to the roots, and then that you process that into your interpretation. And then another conversation more. So it's the experience that is growing into your brain.
Got it.
And your body. That's why we feel it in our body and in our mind. It's like a gravitational field in our mind.
It kind of reminds me of like EMDR in the sense that it helps you to reprocess.
It does. And EMDR is reprocessing, but it's working just with the body. So it's not working with it's pulling the stuff out of our cells, because we store everything in our 37 to 100 trillion cells. We're going to create the neural network, which has got a lot of sophistication to it. And then in our cells, we have another level where we store that in every cell of our body too. And it's a slightly different type of memory. It's not as, it's like the brain network forms first, and then the body networks form after. Almost, it's a very fast process. It happens at the same time, but the one is more insightful than the other. The one kind of follows the lead of the brain. All of it follow the lead of the mind memory. So you're going to build a mind memory, which is like a field. You're going to build a brain memory, which is like a tree. And then you're going to build a body memory, which is in every cell, and that's like little railway tracks.
Wow.
It looks like little very organized railway tracks. So I'm trying to give you the simplest analogies. And the neurocycle is using your psychoneurobiology, mind, brain, body connection to drive information, another level of wise mind information through the brain to fix this.
Got it. So it's like a mind down approach.
Mind down, because without mind, you're dead. Mind is your aliveness. It's your sentience. It embodies your consciousness, your non-conscious, and your subconscious. The unconscious is when you're sleeping. It's not a mind state. It's basically a brain state. It's basically doing it in the right direction. So what I meticulously looked at was the sequence and what's happening at each level. So if you just gather awareness, what's happening, you don't have stability, you don't have continuity, you're going to have to, the meditation always helps, but that's more brain preparation. Meditation, breathing, etc. Those are preparing the brain for the 5 steps. So they're not the same as gather awareness. But if you just do meditation, you take off, the plane will take off. If you just do gather awareness, the plane will take you, your physiology is calm and the plane takes off. But now what? So what you want to do is each step is taking all the energy frequencies of the brain and the neurochemistry and the electromagnetics and all that stuff. Your mind is actually kind of fixing them up, because your brain is organized in such a way that it's because we've got so much going on in our experiences and our mind. Our brain's not really able to keep it in the complexity of our mind. Our brain is not it's not a computer. And it's also, how can I explain this in a very simplistic way? Your brain will work on the simplest operation possible to be the most efficient, because it's a machine. Conservation of energy, exactly. So whereas your mind doesn't work according to algorithmic principles, it doesn't work according to, and your brain also at one level works algorithmically, computationally, then at another level it works on a quantum level. So it's very efficient. So your mind knows that. So if you don't drive energy through your brain in the correct way, you won't take advantage of that efficiency of the brain. And then you won't create sustainable change. So this neurocycle is all this fancy science I'm talking about, is basically those 5 steps are doing that for you. When you do them, I've done the science and the research behind it, that when you do each step, you are taking advantage of making the brain work in the best way possible that you need it to work. So you're driving the functioning of the brain in the right direction. So if you just write, you won't get the same benefit. If you just journal, you won't get the same benefit. If you just say, okay, what can I do about this? Or if you just do a technique like a CBD technique, it won't carry over in the long term.
But I like it because you can dose yourself with it acutely, for various
acute situations.
For various acute situations. Like if you've had a bad dream, or if you had a inconvenient interaction with a coworker that didn't rub you the right way, or if you to reprocess some of this early childhood stuff.
Yeah, so it's the big stuff which you do, the big stuff, the early childhood traumas, those big things, those you.
But it's tactile, which is what I like about it. Right?
It's very sequential. It's very tactile. It's very do this, do this, do this, do this, and as you're doing it, all these great things are happening in your mind-brain connection and your body connection. You're restructuring microtubules and tubulin and all these. You're changing quantum vibrations. I mean, you're doing the most amazing stuff, and it's very creative and it's very unique to you as a person. And you empower to drive that. That's releasing your innate resilience and building it. I like how you said it's dose dependent. It is. So in an acute situation, exactly like you need a mini neurocycle. So we actually have an app where the whole 63-day process that you go through every day, 15 to 45 minutes, would be for your big stuff, the childhood trauma, the patterns in your life that are impacting, that are consistent and impacting big stuff in your life, your work, your relationships, your daily functioning, etc. So you'd work on those. You'd work on one thought, because one thought's got a lot of memories, and you work over 63 days. The dose-dependent, high impact or acute stuff, the colleague at work, or the tantrum in the car, or the sibling fight right now, you can use it quickly in under a minute. I can be looking at you, and I do this when I'm answering questions. I'll go through a quick neurocycle in under 5 seconds, just to process what you're asking, so that I can try and get an active reach, which would be a decent answer. So its use is infinite. It's basically a vehicle within which you can put in whatever you want, and it just makes the mind-brain connection work efficiently. You can also use it to build your brain. So for example, if you have a great experience, I always love talking to you. It's a great conversation, and this will come back in my memory, the thought of this conversation. It's a healthy one. So now if I think about you and I think about this conversation, and that makes me feel good, that's going to come up. So now I want to build the good stuff. I want to break down the bad stuff. So these I'm going to deconstruct and reconstruct by healing the root. You can never eliminate, because it's happened. this is the good stuff. I want to grow this, because if they're like insurance policies. If I now think about our conversation and we've gone really deep and it's been an amazing conversation, it's made me feel like I've learned something, I'll hone in on that when I remember it, and I'll dedicate 2 or 3 minutes or maybe longer to growing this memory. So using the neurocycle to go focus through the 5 steps and make this stronger. Now I've just added another huge boost, which took me 3 minutes to my own inner resilience. So as the things of life that will happen, that will make me cry, that will make me feel like I can't cope, I've been over time building resilience, controlling, detoxing the mind, that I have built into myself a way of crying through that drama, but trauma and getting through it in some way. So I never feel like I want to give up. Even if I might say it, I just know I can draw on some inner strength. And it's because I've worked so hard at building those kind of networks. So it's for building your insurance in your brain, building your resilience as well.
And how long did it take you to develop this?
38 years I've been working on this, but I developed it initially for people with traumatic brain injuries and severe trauma and dementias and learning disabilities and autism. So that's 5. Some of those, 4 of those are neurological categories. One is more of a sort of lifestyle story. So the very first attempt was working with someone who had traumatic brain injury, because I was told in the 80s, that was when I was studying, that our neuroscience professors told us the brain couldn't change. So I thought this can't be true. And that's what they believed in the 80s, that neuroplasticity had not yet been discovered. So I remember asking my professor and saying, but that can't be true, because we aren't the same. We're always different. We're learning new stuff. And if your mind uses your brain, because we still spoke about the mind-brain separation in the 80s, then your brain must be able to change. And he just kind of laughed at me and said, well, go do research. I said, okay, what area? And he said, well, traumatic brain injury, because there's no point in studying it. He literally was mocking me and saying that there was such a dearth of research in the field of traumatic brain injury. And I don't think he was consciously mocking me because I'm a female, whatever, but it was just, really, the science is established. The brain doesn't change, just, deal with it. And okay, go be a student and go study, which was, thank God he said that, because I said, okay, innocently not realizing what was really going on, which was actually a challenge he'd thrown out at me. And I went into traumatic brain injury and started working with people had been written off by neurologists and like as vegetables and whatever, and had a level of competency. And I started working with them and developing the system in that stage, and developed a theory, and saw people that were written off as vegetables and whatever, hardly functioning on a 2nd grade level when they were adults, and within 8 months becoming top academics. And I didn't see it once, I saw it multiple times. And then I knew this was something, and I started developing it. And I initially developed as a learning system. So how to build your brain, because working with traumatic brain injury, we had to rebuild the brain because there was brain damage. Learning disability, they battled at school, so they had how to learn. So I've got a whole learning system that I've developed out of the neurocycle too. And then I started seeing with all these people, hey, if you're battling at school, people are teasing you, there's emotional, you're getting bullied. Let's see how we can use the neurocycle for actually managing life experiences, complex mental health challenges, and so on. And I still do research now. I'm still doing clinical trials. We just recently published a paper. We've got 5 papers being published this year, just showing how when we drive our mind in this direction, how we can change our brain function and our physiology of our body, like lowering homocysteine levels in short time periods like 9 weeks, increasing the length of telomeres in 9 weeks with mind. I mean, these are some quite radical things that we're starting to see. We're seeing patterns of habit formation. So habit formation has been studied for years, but mainly on very simple things like eating your vegetables and washing your hands and, rats in a maze and, maybe study habits, or taking your tablets, but never complex mental behaviors that are extremely challenging, like life stuff. It's hard to study those. So most psychological research has taken something that's simple in the laboratory and simple sort of things and studied simple things. So what we've done is taken very complex life behaviors and tracked them through these 63 days using the neurocycle and looked at it under psychoneurobiological perspective. And this is what we've done it in different situations. And so now we're seeing patterns to habit formation, because there's information out there that habits take about 66 days to form. or something in those regions. So I looked at that as my ballpark, looked at how the brain builds neurons and dendrites and microtubules. And if you look at the timing, it is around about that time, 3 cycles of 21 days. If you have an injury, stem cells form in cycles of 3 weeks to heal the injury. Your immune system works in cycles of these. So I took that concept from the biology and then applied that to the psychology and started looking at complex mental behaviors, and then developed the system even more. And we're constantly developing it. And if there's an improvement that I can make, I go back into the system, we fix it, write a new book, add new things to the app. That's why we've got the app now, the Neurocycle app.
Are there other practitioners using it?
We've got people around the globe that pick up the book, that do the app, we train certified facilitators now.
Wow.
We've just done our first batch we trained up our first 30 last year, and it's taken me a long time to develop a very efficient course that a person can go through, that they do this, they facilitate, that you don't tell people what to do, that you guide them to become empowered. So that's now available. So we've got that happening now, and that can help people reach more people. The big thing is that I want to make mental health accessible and affordable for everyone, and I want people to be empowered and not labeled, because our current psychiatric system has been shown over and over and over again with the research that it's not working, it's not efficient, it's not helping. It's a lot of the medications and things are placebo if you look at the effects and then the side effects. So we need something else. So that's what's driving us, myself and my team, to constantly keep developing and searching. And I was really excited when I saw how it works with young kids. So much of my early work was with young children. I thought, no, we've got to get this into a form that parents can feel empowered, because just last week something came out and it was all over the media about there aren't enough child therapists. And so people are sitting there thinking, I can't help my child. I've got to do, I've got to protect my child. What do I do? Parents have so much trauma inside themselves about parenting children and in social media and artificial intelligence and, what is going to happen. And that fear is enough to create people to crash. So I'm trying to just demystify that fear and say, hey, listen, the reality is that our mind is the most powerful thing. Let's learn to manage our minds as adults, as parents, and then help our kids. And then let's talk about things like AI, which is not even, it is not a threat. It is something that there are problems, but it's not, they can never simulate a human brain because of certain factors. And I mean, we can go down that road if you want to, but it's, it's to help parents to feel I'm not scared. I don't have to wait for the professional to help my child. I can help my child now, because while you're waiting for a therapist, which you probably won't get very easily. If you do, it's very expensive. You may not be able to afford it. You will end up potentially with a psychiatrist who in 15 minutes will diagnose. And I put stories in that book of children that experienced that, who landed up as a 7-year-old with polypharmacy and total wreck, and within 4 days of neurocycling slept through the night, which they hadn't slept since they were a baby, and they had suffered extreme sexual abuse and physical abuse as a baby, and that child literally uses the neurocycle as an 8-year-old to heal, and the parents tried everything and nothing worked. I mean, these are the sorts of stories that are coming back to me without me even knowing the people. So I don't have to work with you to help you, but you can read my stuff. You can learn to do this yourself, and that's why we do what we do. It really it's amazing. It helps people.
Yeah, you're an amazing person. You mentioned it takes 66 days to set a habit.
Yes, so the thinking of 21 came from a surgeon back in the 60s, a plastic surgeon who was actually talking about the cycles of stem cells healing. So he would observe his patients from plastic surgery, the sort of cycle of healing they went through. And then he wrote this whole book about it. He kind of just applied it. He was pretty smart, applied it into psychology. And so it became a myth of the fact that 21 days to build a habit. I mean, it's everywhere. But at 21 days, change will happen. But what will happen in those 21 days is that you will find the issue, and you will have sort of almost like redesigned to the point of what you would like to be, the new habit, but you haven't stabilized it. So they're 50-50. So at any point you can slip back into this. So what we have to do is make this toxic issue, or that bad habit, or the trauma, whatever level in the category from 1 to 10 that it is, at 21 days they equal size. This one's got as much energy as that. So what we want to do is remove the energy and it's literal energy in the proteins, electromagnetic energy, quantum energy from inside the proteins. You want to remove that from so this thing shrivels up, becomes tiny, and this thing becomes dominant. So you still can, let's say that it's the death of a loved one. Like, I know your mom died a few years ago, and dealing with it. But it's not something that at times you will feel, you will have cry, you'll have grief, which is totally normal, because but it doesn't control you that you can't function.
Right.
So you've learned this is part of, it is a traumatic experience, but you've now learned to cope in all the ways that you have learned to cope. And so that, to get to that point where you have a sustainable change that you can actually still move forward with your life, if it's a big trauma, where you've been able to stop the impact of what happened playing out into your future and controlling your future, that takes cycles of multiple cycles. So the first 21 days, it gets even. It takes another 42 days for this to get small and that to get big. So you do the neurocycles through all 63 to 66 days.
So it takes 21 days for whatever that habit is replacing to shrink, so to speak.
Yes.
And then 42 days for the new habit
to stabilize. Yes, to get big and yeah.
Love it. So we talk about on this podcast all the time, how important it is to institute healthy habits, right? Whether it's hydrating more, exercising more, eating a little bit less of the ultra-processed foods and more of the whole foods, more protein, things like that.
Yeah.
Is there any way to lessen the amount of time that it takes to stabilize a healthy habit?
Well, let's put it this way. The research shows that you get complex and simple behaviors. I'm actually doing a whole research study on this at the moment, and we're writing up a paper too. A simple behavior like getting someone to drink more water or wash their hands in a hospital or take a tablet on a regular basis, you can do that quicker. If something's just started, so you can within a sort of almost under 21 days, if it's very, very simple, if it's sort of something that's just an immediate effect, like getting people to go to a gym regularly, you can get the habits to form a little bit quicker, but whether it will be long-term is always going to be the question. So the simple stuff seems to move into a habit level that you do it more quickly, but the long-term change where it becomes part of your lifestyle, that you recognize, okay, I'm not just going to do this now, then next just start the whole process again, where it actually becomes a lifestyle. You do need around about 66 days. So what's interesting about this, Max, is that the first 21 days, you need about 15 to 45 minutes a day using the neurocycle. So that means if you go through 5 steps, you do brain preparation first, which is meditation or whatever, 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes. And then you do your 5 steps. I give lots of options in the books and apps and whatever. And there's tons of ideas out there. As you go through the 5 steps in 15 to 45 minutes, that means you're spending, if it's 15 minutes, you spend about 3 minutes a step. If it's 45 minutes, it's a bit more. But that's the first 21 days. So there's a bit more time. It's more hard work. You feel worse before you get better. Like if you go for surgery, you feel worse before you get better. As you start a new workout, you get sore muscles before you stronger. It's that principle. From day 22 to 63, you only have to spend about 5 minutes a day. So that's going through the neurocycle in just 5 minutes. That's a minute per step. And that's really easy to do to stabilize. So you can even be starting a new thing you're working on and doing the 21 days, and you could be stabilizing something else if it's simple. If it's complex trauma, I don't recommend that you do 21 days, stabilize, and then start another one at the same time, because a lot of stuff will cross over too much. So the more complex, the more invasive in your life, stick with one thought for 63 days. There's a lot of memories in a thought. Look how many branches are on this tree. So people say, one thought? That thought's got so much. Yes, that thought's got all the detail. The detail are the memories. That's what we need to understand. So if we work on too many thoughts, it can be confusing. So while you're in that process of dealing with the complex stuff, what will happen is as you deal with this, you start saying, oh gosh, this is linked to that. This is linked to that. Instead of bringing all of that in, it makes sense sometimes. You see it's actually part of this thought, but it could be a connected thought. You can work on that next time. Having said that, I've had some of my patients that had severe complex trauma, 2 years. So multiple, that would be, if it's 66 days or 63 days, divide that by 365, you're going to do about 6 to 7 neurocycles a year. So it could take up to 12 neurocycles to fix something, to sort of not fix, I don't like to use the word fix, but to come to peace, to fix up the roots, yes, and to get to a level where you can honor your story, but it doesn't control you anymore. So it's different for everyone. But the more simple the thing, the quicker it can happen.
Yeah, because then you can just stack it onto habits that you already have.
You can just add it on. And that's, yeah. So for example, getting my husband to put sunblock on, which has been a 35-year battle. I've now finally getting it right where he puts his moisturizer mixed with the sunblock and do it when he cleans his teeth. You know what I mean? That's stacking habits. And that's a simple thing, but that didn't take 63 days. It took 35 years to find the right way to get him to attach it. So there's a simple behavior that I just attached onto something. He cleans his teeth every day at a certain time. That's when I attach the routine to that. So that was quicker. It's just a silly thing. But.
Is there any truth to that aphorism that you can't? It's hard to teach an old dog new tricks. Like, do we actually get more stubborn as we get older, or is that just a myth? Like, there's a myth that our metabolisms slow down as we get older. That's actually not true.
It's what we do with it. It's how we manage it. Yeah.
Right. Like the reason why we tend to gain weight as we get older, we just get more lax with our dietary choices and we exhibit less non-exercise physical activity. So we burn fewer calories throughout the day.
Yeah.
I mean, it's in general, like people are like, oh, my metabolism's not. That's a myth.
It's a nice excuse too.
It's a nice excuse. Yeah. So any truth like with regard to habits?
Yeah, well, when it comes to the metabolism thing, I agree with you. And there's also one's always got to look at if there's some kind of medication or illness that's slowing it down, which is always a side effect. And I know you handle that. But yeah, I agree with you that it's a myth that happens in terms of mind. Totally. What happens is that take someone who's battling with an addiction, your brain merges with your environment. Your brain only does what you tell it to do, okay? So if I've got a situation in my life that I haven't dealt with, okay, let me say it this way. Let me give you a really simple version. Let's say that someone is experiencing levels of abuse and they process it in however, and they have a coping mechanism in the moment. So very often we see with children that have sexual abuse, they will develop various different coping mechanisms to cope in the moment, but they're not sustainable over the long term. And if they're not dealt with, they play out into especially in the early sort of mid-20s and things, can play out into addictions and things like that. So that's not just sexual abuse, any kind of big trauma, religious trauma, whatever. So what's happening there is that whatever you do to cope, you doing that is actually wiring into the brain. Now, if I keep doing that without resolving, the brain has now been trained with a network that when this is triggered, it does that. So if we don't manage our mind and stand back and observe, what am I doing? Why am I doing that? Why am I feeling like that? Why am I being, what is the trigger? If I don't stop to do that work, I'll just keep doing it over and over again. So when they say you can't teach an old dog new tricks, there is that thing that, oh, well, I've done this for years, so this is who I am.
Right.
But if it's not a healthy behavior, or if it's something that has impacted yourself and your relationships and your daily life and whatever, then maybe you should look at what was wired into your brain, what you have did to cope without judgment, with compassion and kindness to yourself. Is that, okay, I'm doing that, but it's actually disruptive to my family or to myself or to my work life or whatever. And I can change that. Doesn't matter what age you're at. I have a lot of people that actually follow me that are in their 80s and late 70s, and how they'll actually talk about, I thought that was just who I was and I've changed it. My oldest patient was a 84-year-old pilot. This is the most amazing story. 84-year-old pilot who, 84-year-old chartered accountant. I got it wrong. 84-year-old pilot, who obviously couldn't fly anymore. It had been about 12 years since he was able to fly and was devastated. So what he did was he actually decided at 84, I'm not going to fly again. As much as I want to try, as much as I've tried to come, and he actually went back at 84 and learned to become his second interest, which was a chartered accountant, which was about 8 years of studying. So at 92 or something, this guy qualified as a chartered accountant and worked for another 5 or 6 years.
Wow.
So the cognitive reserve that was built there. So there's a situation of, that wiring and that direction had been so ingrained, but he changed and learned another skill, and that made him satisfied and gave him another probably 10, 15 extra good years in his life because of the cognitive reserve that he built.
Damn, you got to stop making excuses, people. Amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming in. This was so fun.
It's my pleasure.
Per usual. We always have such great conversations.
I love talking to you as well.
You're an amazing person. People should definitely check out your books, Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess, and then your new book, How to Help Your Child Clean Up Their Mental Mess. A guide to building resilience and managing mental health. Super important stuff. Hey, if you liked that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.